Welcome everyone to today's presentation on the do's and don'ts of HR outsourcing presented by Peo-marketplace.com and myself. Super excited to share what we have in store for you today. I think a lot of you will learn a couple things from today's presentation and walk away with knowledge you didn't have before around HR outsourcing and what that looks like potentially for your business and your organization. So jumping into the agenda, we'll talk a little bit about who we are, give a quick background on Peo-marketplace and also myself. You want to know who the talking head is. We'll talk about HRI versus HRO, human resource insourcing versus human resource outsourcing. When to do what, when things make sense, when they don't make sense. Traditional HR versus modern HR, the different levels of human resource outsourcing. We'll talk about every executive's favorite three-letter word, ROI, a three-letter abbreviation, return on investment. And then we'll wrap up with questions and closing remarks. All right, let's jump into it. Who we are. So basically, Peo-marketplace, we're an online marketplace of valued, trusted, established PEO providers, right? PEO, if you don't know, stands for Professional Employer Organization, and it's a model of HR outsourcing. There's different models, we'll get into that later in the presentation, but we mainly focus on HR outsourcing specifically to PEOs, and we help businesses find the best fit PEO provider. We do a lot of the heavy lifting to help them, save time, energy, and effort around the entire process. Make sure they are maximizing their investment and finding the right PEO provider. We've worked with all different type of companies, different sizes, different industries, and we continue to do so. We like to consider ourselves the Amazon platform of HRO, human resource outsourcing, and PEO providers, one-stop shop, part of our value proposition to our clients. A little bit about myself. Who am I? My name is Gil Triana. I've got over a decade of human resource outsourcing experience. I am ex-ADP, so during my tenure at ADP, I sold in small market, sold their products in the mid-market as well. I had a number of management positions in the middle market, and I have a lot of experience with ADP's PEO, namely Total Source. Worked very closely with the implementation teams over there, worked very closely with the service teams over there. So I've got a really good grasp on the inner workings of a PEO. Fully licensed property and casualty health insurance broker. I'm a MBA graduate of FIU 2016, Go Panthers. South Florida native, born and raised in the 305. And currently I'm the principal consultant for Peo-marketplace. That's a little bit about myself. So now let's get into the meat and potatoes here. You want to understand, before we get into the ROI and the different topics on the agenda, I think a good place to start out is understanding what HR insourcing is versus what HR outsourcing is, the difference between the two, so you guys as the audience can have a really good understanding of what the difference is between both, and maybe look internally and figure out where you guys are at as an organization. So let's take a look at HR insourcing. What's defined as HR insourcing? Well, you're in-house, right? It's in the name. Most, or if not all, of your HR functions are fully managed by your internal team of HR personnel. This lends itself to a high degree of control over all of the company's HR processes, policies, and decisions, and the company is in sole control over those items. Customization, this has to do with how customizable or how tailored your HR processes are to your organization. Obviously, if you have HR internally, it's going to mirror exactly what the company wants HR to look and feel like. Also, when you're insourcing HR, you have on-demand access to HR professionals, HR personnel on staff for any type of HR issues that may or situations that may or may not come up, and obviously employee interactions as well. Taking a look at on the other side of it, HR outsourcing. When you're outsourcing HR, you're outsourcing your HR functions from for your company to a third-party provider. Now, the degree of outsourcing really depends on the company's outsourcing tolerance, but at the very minimum, companies usually outsource their basic HR functions to a third-party provider, such as a PEO or a HR consulting firm. Expertise. So these third-party providers are able to offer specific HR expertise within specialized areas, right? So for example, a specialist in HR compliance, a specialist in benefits, a specialist in payroll, so on and so forth. Cost efficiency. Sometimes outsourcing may lead to cost efficiency. It really depends on the situation with the employer, but this is due to a shared and reduced administrative burden and shared HR resources. So it's not all on the employer. Some of that is shared with the third-party provider. And also there's some flexibility involved as far as HR outsourcing is concerned. And the flexibility comes in the form of the organization being able to focus on its core business versus having to handle internal HR tasks. Maybe they don't have the bandwidth to do so. The HR provider, the third-party provider, steps in and handles that on behalf of the employer who's outsourcing those tasks. HR outsourcing and insourcing continued. Costs for HR insourcing. Typically, if the company or the employer can handle the fixed costs of having a full-time HR staff, salary, and benefits, they're probably going to want to insource their HR, keep it more in-house. The expertise of internal HR staff, they're going to have a really deep understanding of your organization's industry, culture, trajectory, because they're inside of the organization already. And as far as scalability, in order to scale with a growing headcount, growing company, you're going to have to hire more HR personnel to handle the bandwidth of all of the HR tasks that come in. You're going to need more HR personnel to do that effectively at a high level. HR outsourcing, as far as scalability goes, you can turn on and turn off the services that an employer wants with the third-party provider as needed on an ongoing basis. So that really lends itself to scalability. Risk mitigation, this is unique to HR outsourcing. The HR provider assists with the compliance and reduces legal risks in the form of a word called co-employment. If you don't know what co-employment is, check out, Google it. It's very simple to find, and it's a unique component of HR outsourcing specific to PEO. Consistency, the third-party provider, because they have the bandwidth, they can provide standardized HR processes and best practices and develop that for the employer. Be able to have a consistent process and consistent culture and message across the entire company. Now, as far as HR outsourced functions, you're going to outsource things to third-party providers like payroll administration, benefit administration, compliance, employee support, right? They have questions on their benefits. Usually a third-party provider will have an advocacy center employees can call into. So the support is going to be there from an HR outsourcing perspective. Now, you may be asking yourself, okay, which is the best? I want the best for my organization. So what really fits us? Well, really depends on your organization size, right? So the needs of a 5-employee company versus a 500-employee company, very different. It's going to depend on your company's goals, right? Short-term and long-term HR goals and how those goals can tie in effectively to the overall business goal. And what's your budget look like, right? So do you have the budget to hire more internal HR staff? Perfect. If you need to outsource some of that for cost efficiency, you can also. Really depends where the company is financially and do they have the dollars to spend. And then it's going to also come down to your HR requirements. Do you have pretty simple, straightforward HR requirements? Are you in an industry that requires a little bit more complex of HR processes? Really depends. That's something that's also you need to think about. And ultimately, you need to weigh in the pros and cons of each approach and determine what best aligns and what best fits your organization's needs and long-term trajectory. So now let's talk about when to do what, right? So when to outsource, when not to outsource, when to keep things internally, when to outsource. Let's take a look at some key points here. So let's talk about when to insource. Well, you want to insource your HR if you have a large workforce, right? So if you have a large workforce, say in the hundreds of employees, chances are you've got the finances available to host an internal HR department, staff it with HR personnel in order to, directly control and have a dedicated team to handle the HR workload, right? So if you have a large workforce, chances are you're better off insourcing. Also, something you need to think about is management preferences, right? Does leadership want direct control over all the HR processes and policies? Insource may be a preferred choice. Or do they want to, find a way to hedge against some liability? That's something to think about as well. So it really depends on, what leadership, how leadership views HR. Cost structure. So depending on the cost structure of the organization, can the company absorb the expenses that's related to an HR department? If the answer is yes, insourcing may be the best option. And then what's the long-term lookout of your HR strategy look like? Okay. Do you view HR, or does leadership view HR as a strategic function? If this is so, it requires long-term planning and alignment to make sure that business objectives, can play a pivotal role in the growth of the company and attracting and retaining those top employee talent that's going to affect the company revenue in the long run. So those are a couple points having to do with HR insourcing. So let's take a look at HR outsourcing. When should you outsource? What are some key areas or key indicators that will tell you it's time to outsource? Well, if you're looking for resource efficiency, right? If your organization, maybe you're not quite as large in the hundreds of employees, and but you need some type of dedicated HR, but you can't really afford insource a full-blown HR insource department, then outsourcing may help you fill in the gap when you need the HR expertise but can't afford the full-blown HR department. It'll help you without having to add additional headcount to the organization. Streamlined HR processes, right? So this is going to leverage technology to help you standardize processes, reduce human error, and simplify HR tasks to improve accuracy and improve your data into your people. Reduce administration burden, right? So if you find your company, your HR department, maybe you have a 1-person, 2-person HR department, and you've got 50, 75, 100 employees, the chances are they're probably overwhelmed. So outsourcing can definitely alleviate some of these administrative burdens when it comes to things like payroll processing, benefit administration, any type of HR paperwork. That can, definitely help out, especially if you find yourself that you're already overwhelmed. And then it could also lead to some cost control, right? Some of these third-party providers, because they're so large and they service a lot of different types of clients, as a new client, you can leverage economies of scale for things like benefits, things like services, help you minimize fixed HR costs in the short and long run as well. So that's a little bit about HR outsourcing. So now you guys have an idea of what to look out for when it makes sense to insource, what to look out for when it makes sense to outsource. But have you thought about both, right? This is not an ultimatum. You don't have to pick one over the other. There are options for you that you need to think about in order to make your strategy highly effective and mold that HR strategy directly to the company's ultimate goal, right? So some organizations choose a hybrid model, right? A little bit of insourcing, a little bit of outsourcing, and they really pinpoint what they want to insource and some of the tasks that they want to outsource that maybe doesn't really necessarily bring a whole lot of value to the organization. They outsource that to third-party providers like a PEO, for example. And when outsourcing, it's important to, do your homework, find a reputable HR outsourcing provider, and it's critical for them to understand your overall HR goals, make sure they're able to handle your outsourced tasks effectively and according to your criteria for your organization. So that's food for thought there for you guys. So let's ask the CEO, right? So let's pretend this guy is a CEO for a mid-sized company, and it looks like he could use a nap or maybe a cup of coffee. I don't know. But let's ask the CFO. He says, and he quotes, HR compliance makes us revenue. Interesting. What do you guys think? You think HR compliance makes revenue for a company? Said no CEO ever. So HR compliance is something that could definitely is one of the proponents that could be outsourced. Most companies that we see outsources this component of their HR. So that's a little humor for you guys. So which aligns more with your company? We're going to start talking a little bit about traditional HR versus modern HR. So let's look at traditional HR. Traditional HR, they create execution, they create order, and they establish control over the entire HR process, right? They're viewed as the police of the organization, especially to the employee base. They're usually in charge of transactional work, right? That takes up the majority of their day. Things like payroll, compensation, benefits, handling employee emails, questions, that sort of thing. They execute on strategy that's been established by the leadership. They're lagging a little behind the technology curve, right? And they're more passive service-oriented partner. And ultimately, they're more focused on the organization of the business, right? So they want to organize HR for the business, okay? This doesn't necessarily translate to any type of tangible value for the business, okay? From a modern HR perspective, modern HR is adaptable, it's innovative, and it's fast. It's effective. Modern HR takes the approach of a coach, a mentor, a thought leader within the organization. They focus on the employee experience from hire to fire, right? And they're strategic about their work. They shape and help lead strategy rather than simply executing on what they're told. They're a technology proponent because they understand that there's valuable data hidden within the technology that can help them make strategic decisions for the company. They're a proactive people management. They're not passive. And they're focused on the business of the organization, not the organization of the business. When you're focused on the business of the organization, this is what drives revenue, right? Especially if you have employees. You have to keep in mind, in order to get to modern HR, you have to make sure you've mastered traditional HR first. You cannot skip a step. Traditional HR has to be mastered, has to be buttoned up, has to be tight in order to get over to that modern HR, which every company wants to get. When you start getting to modern HR, that's when you start to be strategic about your hiring, strategic about your people, and your chances are you're finding top talent to help you drive that revenue. But like I said, you gotta master step number 1 before you jump to step number 2 in modern HR. So, did you guys know that there are levels to HR outsourcing? I bet some of you did. Maybe some of you didn't. We're going to jump into a couple levels in a general frame so you understand what HR outsourcing is from a level perspective. So generally you have 5 levels of HR outsourcing. Level 1 is when there's no outsourcing at all, right? So this is 100% in-house HR, okay? Pretty self-explanatory. Level 2 is when an organization maybe purchases an off-the-shelf HR software. They recognize the need, to leverage technology to help them with some of their HR tasks, but the technology or the software is just that. It's software, you tell it what to do. There's still a very large manual component, an in-house component to level 2. Fun fact, I don't know if you guys know this, but QuickBooks started off as a general ledger, right? Then they expanded into payroll, offering payroll services. And now they're starting to offer some light HR services. Pretty interesting. Then we jump over to level 3, right? You're starting to outsource some HR, but to a CPA or accountant. And hear me out on this. Most small businesses, as they grow, their CPA or their accountant becomes a trusted advisor over time. So the accountant and the CPA, they start off handling and organizing the company's finances. Then as the company grows, they start adding employees. The CPA offers payroll services, right? Maybe it's a gimme. That's part of the the accounting work. They'll say to the business owner, hey, I'll do your payroll, don't worry about it. We'll include it as part of the bundle package of the services that we provide as your CPA. But what ends up happening is that as that company continues to grow, just organically, they're going to have HR questions and services and issues pop up that they have their CPA answer for them. But obviously, the CPA, HR is outside of their scope. Nowadays, modern CPA firms are starting to offer some type of HR services, recruiting services, technology services. You'll be surprised. There's a lot of firms out there that are starting to expand into this realm. So level 3 is outsourcing to some type of trusted advisor. Level 4, right? This is your payroll service provider, right? Technically, these payroll service providers offer technology only solutions. And the services vary widely depending on the provider and depending on the technology modules that you as the employer purchase. Technology can be really good and can definitely help with a lot of the HR tasks, especially when outsourcing. But technology is only as good as the people that are behind that technology. So if you're just given a software or cloud-based system and maybe a little bit of training in the beginning, but then for the rest of it, you're left on your own, sometimes that's oftentimes, I should say, that's the reality when it comes to payroll service providers. Not very proactive, more reactive if you need anything from these providers from an HR outsourcing perspective. Level 5 is PEO. So this is the ultimate 100% outsourced HR model. PEOs are experts when it comes to outsourcing and helping employers handle their traditional HR needs, right? So if you think about the slide that I just showed you a couple slides back on traditional HR versus modern HR, you cannot get to modern HR or strategic HR without being able to master traditional HR, your basic HR needs, right? Some companies just don't want to take the time, energy, and effort to master traditional HR, make sure everything works as it should, traditional policies, processes, etc. In order for scale, efficiency, and speed, they may look at a PEO and outsource the traditional HR component of their business so they can get to strategic HR faster, right? Finding that top employee, retaining those top employees. So ultimately it can grow bottom line and top line revenue for the company. PEOs are masters at HR outsourced, and they're masters at the business of employment. So there's a lot of them out there. Really is important to do your due diligence. So these are the 5 levels of HR outsourcing in a general sense. We can get really nitty gritty down to the specific different models, but to give you guys an overall view, this is what you're looking at as far as HR outsourcing, different levels. Now, depending on where your organization is at, it depends on what level may or may not resonate the most with you. Really, you got to look internally and really determine whether insourcing is the best fit, outsourcing is the best fit, or a combination of both. If it's a combination of both, or it's just 100% outsourcing, here are the different levels that you can look at and start to think about when considering outsourcing a portion of your HR for your business. So what we also did is we illustrated what you just saw in different levels, and it's a very simple illustration to tie back ROI to, okay, return on investment. So what's your return on investment when you're either have everything in-house manually, right? Here I got my pointer. Have everything in-house manually, are using off-the-shelf software, are using your accountant or an outsourced trusted advisor, are using a full-service payroll technology provider, or are using a PEO, right? So it goes from 100% insourced all the way to the right to 100% outsourced. Here's kind of the spectrum that you're looking at. Let's go by your time spent. So obviously if you're doing things manually, that's going to take up the most time. And then as you start heading to the right, you start incorporating a little bit of technology with off the shelf. You save a little bit of time. You use an outsourced trusted advisor, outsourced firm. You save a little bit more time. And then when you start using a full service payroll provider or a PEO, you guys are going to save the most time, from spending on, transactional HR work. Okay. Your risk of errors, right? You always have to account for human error. But the nice thing about this is that if you look all the way over to the right, there's no error when it comes to using a PEO. Now you're probably asking yourself, why is that? Well, if you remember to one of the first slides that I showed you today, there's this word called co-employment. When you co-employ with an HR outsourcing provider in a PEO, that PEO enters into an agreement with you as the employer saying that they will take over and they will become responsible for certain basic HR tasks. Some of those HR tasks include payroll tax and tax liability, HR compliance, benefit administration. So if something happens and there's an error that occurs, the PEO will pick up the tab on that, not necessarily you as the employer. So that's how they're able to offer 100% reduced risk of error and give back obviously a lot of time to you as a business. And then you have everything in between here. Your compliance liability. So obviously if you have everything in-house or you have off-the-shelf software, you're taking on liability 100% for your compliance. It's your responsibility. Your accountant can help with some compliance, but more specific when it comes to tax compliance, not necessarily HR compliance or benefit compliance or anything related. When you outsource to a full service payroll provider, remember this is usually technology only solution. So the technology is really good in capturing and identifying potential liability, right? They help you organize all your files, like for example I-9s, EEOC reporting, ERISA, those sort of things, right? But still there's a compliance liability in that. On the PEO side, 100% outsourced, they're going to take on the majority of the compliance liability, but you as the employer still has a responsibility of reporting and making the PEO aware of any new liabilities that may come up within your organization. Because remember, they're outsourced. It's a partnership. They're relying on you to inform them of any changes that they need to know in order to keep you in compliance, in order to keep you as little liability as possible. So it's a partnership there. So the cost to buy. So what does it cost, right? So having a HR insource from a from a process standpoint is very economical. Now keep in mind this doesn't include any HR salary or benefits. This is strictly the cost of the tasks or the processes. Off-the-shelf software is going to cost a little bit more. When you're looking at an outsourced trusted advisor or an outsourced firm, that's going to come up as far as more cost to buy. When you're outsourcing to a full service payroll provider, that's a little bit more expensive. And then all the way at the end of the spectrum, that's more expensive based on the other options, is a PEO, because you're outsourcing everything. So it really depends on your perceived value of the different services, and ultimately what's the ROI, what's my spend versus what is my return on investment. So this is something that you need to also factor in and get a good picture of the overall cost and the overall ROI when you're choosing to either in-house, in-source, or fully outsource, or anywhere in between. Access to tax expertise. Obviously when you're doing in-house, depending on how big your organization is, maybe you have a controller, maybe you have somebody in finance, maybe not, right? Maybe you're just a small business. You're probably not going to have access to an internal tax expert. Off-the-shelf software, most of them don't offer tax expertise. They'll offer you guidance, but tax expertise is very broad, especially when it comes to, you know, an organization, many different, you know, facets of taxes. When you're using your accountant, obviously, this is why you hire them. You hire them for their tax expertise, so you're going to get that with an accountant or CPA. When you hire and buy a full service payroll provider, they're going to offer you tax expertise on and pertaining to payroll tax liability, right? This doesn't include your sales tax. This doesn't include your gross receipts. This is specifically to payroll tax liability. And then same thing with PEO. You'll get tax liability on the payroll tax, but also they will identify potential tax credits based on, you know, what you file for your company benefits, 401k. They'll find any tax credits, and most of the time they'll pass it through back to you as their client. And then last row down at the bottom, HR support beyond payroll. So if you're doing things in-house, chances are you probably don't have HR support beyond payroll, right? Especially if you're a small business. If you're using off-the-shelf software, you may have some type of HR support. Maybe that software includes an employee handbook, wizard, creator, but it's very limited. When you're using your accountant, a lot of us use our accountants as kind of the therapist. Accountants did not go to school for HR. They went to school for taxes. So this is outside of the scope for the accountant. When you buy a full service payroll provider service, you may get HR support, but it's optional, right? Usually it's an add-on, a la carte, and it really depends on what type of HR support you're getting. Usually that's in the form of technology, not necessarily, you know, say like a strategic HR person or anything like that. When it comes to PEO, they offer HR business partners. Most PEOs offer HR business partners to their clients, where this is an outsourced, dedicated HR generalist for your business, and they'll help you tackle a lot of HR, you know, HR tasks, HR needs, HR issues that pop up. And the PEO offers specialized HR experts, like I mentioned in the earlier slides, around payroll, benefits, compliance, that sort of thing. So you really get, you know, a lot of HR support when it comes to a PEO. So let's see. So is this you right now? I know we went through a lot. Your mind is probably spinning right now. You're trying to do some complicated HR equations in your head. Don't want you to feel that way. I hope we did provide a lot of information. If you're feeling this way, if you're a little overwhelmed, you don't know where to really start, or you know, you kind of feel overwhelmed or stuck, it doesn't have to be complicated, right? Wherever you are in your HR journey, you can always seek help. There are firms out there that can help you with your specific HR goals, whether it's insourcing, whether it's outsourcing, or it's something in between. We recommend, excuse me, we recommend engaging some of these firms, right? If you're looking to make an HR decision, whatever that may be, having an outside perspective, a third party, help you in your decision can get you and give you a fresh perspective on what the best course of action may be for your company's HR. There's a lot of them out there. Just Google, you know, there are a ton of them that pop up. I'm sure you'll find one. And that's it, guys. So I really appreciate everyone's time. If you have any question whatsoever, please feel free to call us. Feel free to email myself. My email's down there at the bottom. Or go on our website and schedule a call. if you feel like you need any help when it comes to HR outsourcing, specifically when it comes to PEO. We'll be happy to have a one-on-one conversation with you, unbiased, relaxed, right? Kind of guide you through what we recommend, hear you out, see what your needs are, that sort of thing. And again, I was very, very excited to be with you here today. If you found this valuable, please give us a like, follow us on all our social media, and spread the word. We routinely work with employers to help them figure out their HR strategy, short and long term. So that's it for me. Hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, you know how to reach out. Thank you, and take care for now.